Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this webinar today. My name is Hillel. I'm the president and the CEO of the Arizona-Israel Technology Alliance. Thank you for joining us again today for the webinar and discussion with Consul General Hillel Newman in Israel's consul in LA. With close to 200 registrants, many from Arizona and Israel who are active and engaged with Arizona and Israel collaboration, as well as people signing in from other parts of the globe. We have Australia, the UK, Singapore, and elsewhere. Before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping items. This event will last approximately an hour. Audience members will be muted without their video showing on the screen. This webinar will be recorded and shared on social media. Please feel free to share. On the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A button. Feel free to submit any questions you may have, and we'll try our best to answer them in pending time. If you have any technical difficulties, Zoom recommends just logging out and signing back in. We invite you to share this webinar on social media. Feel free to tag the Arizona-Israel Technology Alliance or hashtag ArizonaIsrael. Make sure to follow us on LinkedIn for the most up-to-date news and information, and visit our website, arizonaisrael.com, for our monthly newsletters. Without any further ado, it's my pleasure to welcome Israel Consul General, Dr. Hillel Newman. Dr. Newman serves as the senior representative of the State of Israel to the Pacific Southwest with a PhD in Jewish history. Dr. Newman has served in several influential and critical positions, including policy advisor to 3 foreign ministries of Israel, and ambassador of Israel to Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. Dr. Newman, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Leib. It is really my pleasure and honor to be hosted by you and by the Arizona-Israel Technology Alliance. I know that you do wonderful work. The amount of Israeli companies has doubled in the area of Arizona over the past few years, and that is no doubt part of your intensive efforts. And we appreciate it immensely. And I look forward to your questions and the audience. And I'd like to thank those that have joined us to watch this.
Thank you. And this is your first, I would say, virtual presence in Arizona. There was supposed to be a physical presence back when we hosted our water delegation last year, where we had a cohort of approximately a dozen Israeli water technology companies here. We thought at the time that the political situation in Israel was at its height, and that was what was stopping you from coming here, but we were to learn a lot more on how complex that would get. In today's climate, with the pandemic going on, Israel has led the way in several initiatives. And I think for the purposes of this webinar today, I'd like to take a look at what's going on in Israel, what's happening, how it's leading on the technology front, on the innovation side, and then we're going to go ahead and visit some aspects as it relates to commercial interests in Arizona. So starting off with the coronavirus, can you give us a rundown of what's happening in Israel and what can we learn?
Sure. Let me just respond to the first part of your words and say that I would really like to visit Arizona, and it's a high priority on my agenda. Unfortunately, of course, due to the circumstances and the situation, and we all know the situation, we cannot visit right now, but it's certainly a high priority on my agenda to visit Arizona and meet you and your counterparts and the work there. Regarding the leadership of Israel, let me perhaps open up with a bird's eye view of what is unique about Israel, and then we can perhaps go into specific items of interest in innovation. That's the title of this session. So I'll just say that Israel was one of the first to implement restrictions. Already in February, Israel implemented restrictions on movement and entry and other restrictions. And Israel, perhaps as a result of that, is one of the first to implement an exit strategy, a pilot exit strategy. Israel was, I think, only second in implementing the beginning of the implementation of an exit strategy for the entire society of Israel. And there were a few things that are quite unique about Israel. And you asked about Israel leading the way. So I'll mention a few things. First of all, coming together, uniting. As a result, you could say as a result of the coronavirus, we have formed an emergency unity government, where I think we're the only country in the world that has had this kind of an effect. It's like the Democrats and Republicans coming together to form a government. Of course, it would be like mind-boggling, but it happened in Israel. And now we have a large, wide-supported government of 73 members of parliament out of 120. That's quite a significant, it's one of the largest parliaments, one of the largest supported governments in history. And this is as a result of the coronavirus. So I think this is also a lesson in Israel is leading the way in the fact that we should all come together, we should unite, we should compromise. Such a uniting of forces means that each one has to compromise in order to come together. The second aspect that I would say is unique about Israel and also leads the way is the fact that Israel approached the whole issue of coronavirus in a high-tech approach. And that led the way in many ways in devising new, we can talk about it later if you ask, but devising new devices, innovation at the service of fighting the coronavirus. It became a big thing. Incubators were set up, multidisciplinary teams were set up, an interesting mix of computer scientists together with doctors, together with engineers, amazing. Third thing I would say that is unique to Israel, and Israel led the way, is the fact that Israel approached the whole issue of coronavirus as a national security issue, as if we were at war. So the war is not against humans, it's against this disease, this plague, but that's how the entire state of Israel related to the issue. And central command center was set up and all the apparatuses of the government were brought in, and they used to have daily sessions and talk about the needs, the problems, and how to solve them. And our Ministry of Foreign Affairs, like the State Department, was also brought in, was a significant player in solving many of the issues, and all the diplomats of Israel were at service of this national security issue as if we were at war. And that influenced also my work here in Los Angeles. The last thing I would say that is unique in Israel was the fact that there was an intense connection between the IDF and the civic needs. And the IDF was instructed to serve civic needs. So the military became part and parcel of many services for the civil society. So you found all of a sudden IDF soldiers walking in the cities, giving out food distribution, an interesting mix and meeting between IDF soldiers and ultra-Orthodox populations that never meet. We also had military installations that were transformed very quickly into the service of coronavirus devices. So the entire state got together, I would say, and the results was that Israel led the way in many breakthroughs. Israel in the vaccines area, in devices in dealing with coronavirus, and the exit strategy. So in these pieces of world, I would say that Israel has become a leader, but of course there are many players doing important work.
Thank you for that. Can you go a little bit more into detail? Are there case studies or examples on some of the initiatives that they have, that they're innovating, whether it's on the medical device side or others?
Sure. And the title of this session is Innovation Serving the Future. And that is so true, because I think that the one aspect which is most prominent is the fact that artificial intelligence will be the king of the future. We see the economic ramifications and we see negative effects, but there's one thing that's definite, and that is that artificial intelligence is on a rise and will serve the needs of the community at large during the virus and after. So that means that also even at times of challenge, we have opportunity. And this opportunity is by meeting the challenges, we will develop spheres of economy that might be new, but will be serving the future. Now, the coronavirus has actually accelerated trends that began before. If we talk about the fact that already, if you look at the past decade or two, you can see the definite trend in global economy moving towards innovation and artificial intelligence. If you look at the top 10 companies, for instance, 10 years ago, or 15 years ago, and you look at the top 10 companies today, it's a totally different world. If a decade ago it was energy companies, today it's companies like Amazon, Facebook, which lead the list. So we can see that there's a definite trend, and coronavirus has only accelerated this trend much more. Now, if you look at fields, there are very interesting fields that are emerging as the fields of the future. If I just mention a few by title, and then I'll mention a few examples. Telemedicine, tele everything really, but remote medicine is a thing of the future. PPEs, 3D PPEs, contact tracing, ventilators, all these aspects of what we could have in the future, moving towards automation, artificial intelligence. It can apply in just about every single field of economy. Remote delivery, delivery lines, streaming, all digitalization, automation, all these fields, education platforms, even sports and other things through streaming, touchless. All these fields are the fields of the future. If you ask what about specific items, I would say that very interesting things have come out of the research, the R&D, and the applying sciences in the fields that we're talking about. And if I mention a few examples, for instance, in the remote medicine, which you asked about, interesting things have been developed, like for instance, diagnostics according to smell, or diagnostics according to the vision, upfield vision of a person, can give vital signs taking of that person. Today we have systems that even just by the smell or the look of a person, you can start and diagnose whether he's sick or he's not sick. Today we have applications that can diagnose a person within a minute, or whether he is sick with the coronavirus or he's not sick with the coronavirus. Another aspect of diagnostics in the medicine is the touchless and remote medicine. So Israel developed ICU units, complete units that are completely independent. They don't need human beings operating them next to the patient. So you have what you call now isolated units of ICU, robots that serve medicine and can make contact with people, provide food, take vital signs, and even diagnose. There's a very interesting company which is called Temi, which is an Israeli with American other counterparts, which is developing these type of robots, which are remote medicine diagnostics and treatment. So the whole field of medicine, remote medicine, diagnostics is amazing. I'll mention another company in the field of medicine, for instance, Surgical Theater, which is here in Los Angeles, and they're working in the entire United States, where they have 3D a vision of the human body. So a person comes in, they take an MRI, they take a CT scan, and then they can build a 3D dimension, 3D vision of his specific human body, and then they can color specific parts of the brain, specific parts of the body. So you can see, for instance, coronavirus in a specific color, where it's attached to the lung, and how much of the lung has been consumed by the virus. So this is a very interesting field. It was developed by actually people who developed the simulators for the Air Force in Israel. You know, pilots in Israel, they have to train. So they train on simulators. So those that devised the simulators are now devising very advanced medical devices. I would mention, if I just mention a few more, contact tracing. The ability to now trace a person's movements, even days after. The need arose because people, all of a sudden, someone is diagnosed as sick, and then they needed to know with whom he was in contact. So you could diagnose who is in a high-risk category of being sick. So Israel developed this, and now we have a contact tracing that just by an application on a cellular phone, you can follow a person's walk or route over the past few days and see with whom he had contact. So these are amazing things which can influence our lives in a big way. Ventilators or devices or 3D The 3D printing is a very big field for the future. There are a few Israeli companies that have gone into this. 3D printing, of course, with that you can now print human shields, you can print masks, you can print different devices that are so needed. As a result of the 3D printing, Israel became completely self-reliant in the devices and that were needed. If I mention one more thing, a few more examples in diagnostics, there's like medicine and general diagnostics. You have smart glasses. There are a specific type of glasses that you can put on, and they can read the vital signs of a human being. You can tell if he's got temperature. You can tell if he's sick in a big way, in a significant manner. So these things are developing. Another aspect I would mention, lastly, is remote delivery. And there's a very interesting company to follow. It's called Flytrex, and they have drones which serve individual human beings. So you can deliver something to someone without having any contact, without having any direct contact. You can deliver food, you can deliver medication, you can deliver messages to someone with your personal drone. And it's already active in Dakota and in other places in the United States. So there's a lot going on and very diverse directions one can go.
So you mentioned Flytrex. I'm going to start a little bit backwards. You know, Flytrex, you know, we've had the opportunity to meet the CEO and talk with him about some of the innovations that they're doing. And you talk about some of the areas and how they're focusing on solving challenges during this time period. One of their focuses when we spoke with them about 2 years ago was they were working with golf courses, delivering food to the tee holes. And to look at that company of what it's doing today, I would say is a testament of how you know, an Israeli company adapts to specific situations and how they're able to take, I would say, not a purposeless mission, obviously one that, you know, they were serving many golf courses, but to be able to use it for the greater good, I think is testament to some of the innovation that's going on in Israel. You mentioned as well, I think that there's many of the technologies we're hearing about what they're doing today. They have prior histories in other areas, and they're able to either utilize it, or there's new technologies that are actually being founded today. And I think that is really within the DNA of Israel, whether you look at whether it was the arms embargo from France and the need to be able to increase its military capabilities internally. And throughout Israel's history since 1948, we see this tendency. So I would say it's no surprise that when another challenge comes along, you know, Israel has always thrived and prospered and been resilient when challenges come along, and normally it's in other forms. Obviously, we're facing a global pandemic today, and they're utilizing these capabilities to be able to solve the challenges. You mentioned as well, you know, on the contactless tracing, there's many, you know, there's many countries that are implementing different protocols and apps that, whether it's in Australia, they have an app, or in Germany. Is there anything proprietary about what's happening in Israel on that front, or is Israel working with other countries? Are they collaborating with other countries to be able to best solve, you know, the pain points and the challenges that, you know, the global, you know, the global focus and the global regions have?
Sure, thank you. Let me just add one leg to what you mentioned, and that's the unique aspect of Israel. You know, many ask why Israel has been termed the startup nation. And I know that Arizona is also the startup state, and we have a lot in common in that aspect. But the startup nation, Israel has become what, I mean, it has this terminology of the startup nation, and it's very true to its essence. And many people have asked, well, why is it that Israel has become this dominator in innovation? And I would say that there are two unique aspects about Israel. One is that we never had natural resources, and we were surrounded by states which were very wealthy and rich with natural resources, and we did not have those resources. So we had to develop ourselves and develop our sustenance in different ways. And that was with the brain power and with innovation. That's one aspect. The second aspect is Israel was forever under threat. From its re-establishment in 1948, we know the response of the Arab and Muslim world. They negated the existence of the state of Israel and called for its destruction. And immediately there was what was called the War of Independence. So that put Israel into a situation that it was always in the need of protection and defense. And that also caused a situation of fluidity, an ability to move very fast from what we would call normative situation to an emergency situation. And that fluidity gives Israel a special, I think, unique, quick movement. And that's why in this case, for instance, the coronavirus, we found ourselves very quickly moving into the mode of, okay, let's find the solutions. There are very few countries in the world that have had to sit in shelters with gas masks or suffer rockets from the southern part, from Gaza we have. So this gives a special, unique, I think, vigilance to Israel. Regarding international cooperation, we can talk, if you want, about the global trends and the projection for the future, but you asked about cooperation, and I'd just like to say that, of course, there is tremendous cooperation. The R&D cooperation is developing all the time. We have cooperation between Israel institutes, whether it be in R&D or in the applications and in the developing of the end product. We have cooperation with many companies in the United States, also with Italy. There are many things on the go. I can't go into names and figures because you need permission from everyone in advance to tell what they're doing and how much and etc. But I can just tell you that there are many companies that are cooperating, and we're in favor of all types of cooperation, including Arizona. And we'll be glad to develop further the cooperation in Arizona. Perhaps we'll talk soon about the relations in Israel and Arizona, but I just put this on the table right now that we have a great interest in promoting R&D and development of perhaps even products with Arizona.
I think on that note, that's a good segue into coming close to the topic of specifically Arizona. But I think prior to taking a focus on Arizona and Israel collaborations, I think from a more holistic perspective, understanding the impact on Israel's economy because of the pandemic. If we look at, or if we are we seeing anything currently, or are there any ramifications on commerce, exports that Israel is expecting to see change, whether it's going to be an increase or decrease because of the pandemic? If we look at 2019, there was about $114 billion in exports, and the majority of that was in high tech. Are we, the economy and specifically different sectors, some are prospering, some are highly challenged. When it comes to, a large majority of Israel, import-export, are we going to see any changes in that? Or is there any roadmap or prediction or anything that's currently happening now that this pandemic is affecting the Israeli economy?
Sure, thank you. Allow me to start off with a more broader view, and then I'll go into Israel. But let's talk about changes that are taking place globally. And then I'll go into the zoom in on how it influences Israel as well. So if you look, there are a lot of people who spoke about doomsday scenarios about the world and a complete collapse of the geopolitical order. That's not true, and we shouldn't exaggerate things. But there will be significant shifts in the directions and the world, and let's say the economic world order, and it might also influence political order in some way or another. Even regimes may fall. It's also on the table. It might happen. So we do expect significant shifts in the economic world order. In the short term, we'll definitely see an upbeat in consumer demand. As people get freer and they have freedom of movement, I have no doubt that there will be a consumer demand. People need things. People have been, under lock. under home lock, and when they get free, then they need things, and there'll be a rise in consumer demand. But that's not the real impact in the long term. And we should look at the long-term impact. If we look at the long-term impact of the coronavirus, then there are a few things that we should say. First, gaps will widen between the more wealthy and the less wealthy, between the developed countries and the underdeveloped countries. The second thing is that global chains will move towards local chains. Globalization in general will move towards nation-state economies. So things will become more local. And that is relevant for the production lines and also the delivery lines of produce. In-person services will move out, will wade out in not completely, but of course, I'm talking about percentages, and we'll see a rise in the need for online services, digitalization, and automation. So that's really, I think, things that we should look forward, what's going to happen in the future. I would mention one more thing. If we look at the fields that are going to lead the future, then I would say that more or less the following fields are going to lead the future. And it's all under the category of artificial intelligence and innovation. But I would stress remote technologies, touchless devices, digitalization, streaming services. Streaming services you just look at Netflix, and you look at Amazon, and you see their rise in the recent period as a result of the coronavirus, and you see that things are changing, things are transforming. As cyber systems, as everything will go digitalized, the cyber systems will also take a prominence in everything that services the digitalization process, and that includes, of course, cybersecurity, biotech, all the fields of bioscience and biotech, robotics and diagnostics, robotic diagnostics, the two of them together. These are fields of the future. Local production lines, as I said before, which will be interpreted into different changes or shifts in the local economy. And anything that's connected to energy security, food security, and self-reliance. So now, after looking at the global picture, and that looks like the direction of the future, let me focus in a little bit more on the Israeli economy. So the Israeli economy has suffered a blow like everyone else in the world. Our unemployment has risen from 4% to 26%, but a tremendous aid package has been set forth by the government of Israel. It's the largest assistance package in the history of Israel, and it covers just about all the different sections or sectors of need in Israel. And looking towards the future, there will be changes. Again, along with the lines that I mentioned before of the global trends, we can only assume that also the export and import of Israel will change accordingly. There will be much more stress on digitalization, automation, exports that have to do with such things, and imports that have to do with such things. Anything that's connected to innovation and artificial intelligence, R&D, all these fields will be on the rise. What we would call classical trade of the past might go on a down. So we should really think of the fields of where the global community is going. Israel will be one of the leaders in those fields. And accordingly, the export and import and trade of Israel will also change. So I think if you ask, will there be a rise? There will be a rise in certain sections, and there will be a drop in others. So it's not like you have a flat answer. It depends on the specific fields of interest. So what we would call anything that's connected to globalization and booking from all types of places around the world, it depends. It depends what it is, where it's from. Some will go on a rise and increase, and some will decrease. So I think it really depends on the field of interest, the field of economy, and that will be decisive of whether it will go on a rise or a drop.
Consul General, you mentioned about bringing things, you call it in-house, or bringing things closer to home. Just a development on the Arizona side, a recent announcement that came out last week was Taiwan's TSMC, which is the semiconductor company that supplies Apple chips. It's a $12 billion investment that's coming into Arizona, and there's obviously been a strong effort by the current administration in the United States to bring manufacturing jobs to the United States as a whole. You mentioned that bringing things internally is something that needs to be strongly considered, and I wonder and I question what are the manufacturing capabilities in Israel, and can Israel meet the demand to, if that is a trajectory in which governments and countries are going to be pursuing. And obviously supply chain has been an incredible Achilles heel and challenge within this time period. And I wonder, and I ask you, is that something that Israel has the capacity to be able to bring things internally?
Yes, local manufacturing is an item of the future, no doubt. Israel has moved very quickly from procurement to manufacturing. So all the items that we needed, like the PPEs, ventilators, the assisting devices, at the beginning of the coronavirus, we were instructed as diplomats to go out and procure and purchase these items. And that was one of the top issues on our agenda. And we were active here also in California because there are many companies here in California. But very quickly, with the conversion of military installations into civil manufacturing and all kinds of high-tech hubs that were set up and incubators and multidisciplinary teams, solutions were found for local production. So Israel has moved very quickly from purchasing abroad to local production. Now we've reached a situation we have an excess of all the devices and the items and the equipment that we need. So we've started even exporting, giving donations or export to other countries of need. We've given donations to quite a few countries just because we have now the access and we have the ability. So I think this is symbolic of the fact that this does definitely show that there is a move from global purchasing to local production. And Israel will continue that trend, no doubt. There are some things, of course, that Israel does not have the capability to produce itself, and then it will work with partners. We work a lot with the United States. We'd be glad to work with Arizona. And there's also a lot we can do with other countries. But the future is actually moving towards local production and self-reliance, whatever that means. So in self-reliance, it doesn't mean always that you only manufacture yourself. It can also mean that you work with close allies and you self-produce together in a co-production. So you pick your friends and you pick your allies and you work with them closely.
Thank you. I think moving on and taking a look at Arizona and some conversation on Arizona's growth. If we look at, there are currently approximately 25 Israeli companies in Arizona. This is an increase by from 13 when our organization, the Arizona Israel Technology Alliance, was founded towards the end of 2017. Additionally, over the last 18 months to 24 months, we worked with the state legislator, particularly state legislator Tony Rivero, and the signing by Governor Doug Ducey, who's a great friend and supporter of Israel, in Arizona's second international trade office, the first being Mexico. And that this was established last year, end of last year in Israel. We were fortunate to lead Arizona's largest trade delegation outside of U.S. waters in its history for the opening of this office. The governor wasn't able to join us. He did make a personal trip towards the end of last year. And this trade office is run by our good friends and our partners by the Arizona Commerce Authority. We have several new companies that will be announcing their presences in Arizona this year, even amid the pandemic. I would say just a couple of weeks before the pandemic ensued, we had to relocate, and they are, most of them are just wanting to be able to wait for things to calm down to announce. which is obviously continuously encouraging. We've seen, I would say, even in the pandemic, a real uptake and an increase of where I would say as an organization we are inundated with requests by Israeli companies on the commercial side to be able to assist them in the Arizona market. Additionally, the Bird Foundation has increased its efforts in Arizona. They have their calls for proposals out if there's anyone who's looking for non-dilutive funding for joint ventures with Israeli companies. And I could go on and on with different things that have happened and are continuing to happen. We have great governmental leadership here. We have great partners in collaboration. But you know, from the Consul's general vantage point, will this pandemic affect companies expanding, number one, into the US and or Arizona?
Thank you, Leib. Allow me once again to start from the bigger picture, then zoom into Arizona. I'd like to say that the relations between the United States and Israel are fascinating, tremendous, and growing. And that influences also our ability to work with individual states in an enhanced manner. So if I just mention a few examples, for instance, at the beginning of the coronavirus, Vice President Pence and Prime Minister Netanyahu came out with a joint statement about the need to cooperate and intensify the cooperation between Israel and the United States. There's legislation going through in the Congress as we speak on increased scientific cooperation between Israel and the United States. Only a few days ago, Secretary of State Pompeo visited Israel, one of his first visits since the outbreak of the pandemic. So if you look at it and you say, out of all the countries in the world, Pompeo visits Israel as one of his first foreign visits since the outbreak of the pandemic. So that says a lot about the intensity and the intimacy of our relationship. We have a lot to do. You know, we've developed, for instance, just an example, the Iron Dome, which is the first active protection against ballistic missiles, which is now operative in Israel and around the world. So there's a lot Israel and the United States can do working together. Now, that's the broad picture. If I focus in on Arizona, I'd like to say a few things about Arizona. First of all, we know that Arizona has a tremendous amount to offer. We know that it has a large and diverse economy. We know that the GDP is amazing, at least it was until the beginning of the coronavirus, $40,243 per capita. Service industries which are of great interest to Israel, like the 5 Cs and the healthcare and the transportation and government field and all that. So these are fields which are of interest to Israel, and also the ambition of being the startup state brings us a close affinity to Israel as well. There's great attraction for Israelis in Arizona, and I'd like to mention why. First of all, skilled labor in Arizona. We're aware of the fact that there's a skilled labor work in Arizona. The friendly relations from the leadership of Governor Ducey and Tony Rivera, you mentioned him, a great friend of the state of Israel and the people of Israel. There are many players who are good friends of Israel, and we work together very closely. Excellent universities, and the artificial intelligence focus of Arizona, which exists in Arizona. And of course, the Arizona-Israel Technology Alliance, run by you, which plays a tremendous, an important place in developing our relations. Now, we also have specific aligned sectors, which I think are of interest both to Arizona business people and Israel. For instance, the aerospace, for instance, defense. You know, you have Raytheon. We have already work going on between Israel and Raytheon. Autonomous, the entire autonomous sector, whether it be vehicles or other smart mobility, that's a very big thing between, which you can develop even further between Israel and Arizona. You know, just Intel has a lot of contacts with Israeli companies. Mobileye, Intel just bought an Israeli application called Move It, which is even during the coronavirus, they bought this application, $900 million deal. So there's a lot going on. Water, the entire field of water technologies. There's such modern systems now in water, whether even irrigation. I know that one of the C's of Arizona is citrus, and the whole field of irrigation, agriculture is a field that Israel has a lot of experience in, and we also want to learn from others. We're also a desert. We used to be a desert. We managed to flourish the desert. So that's also part of fields that we can develop. Cyber terrorism, cyber protection, biotech and biosciences. So there's so much for Arizona and Israel to work on. We're really also interested in, there are very interesting companies in Arizona. I mentioned Raytheon and Honeywell and Intel, and there are other companies that we can certainly work on together. And another thing I'd say is that the opening of the trade office between Arizona and Israel was a very important step. It happened last year, really, and we are sorry that the delegations, we cannot continue with delegations right now, but I'm sure that in the future we will resume trade delegations between Israel and Arizona and move forward. As you said, there's been an increase in Israeli companies working in Arizona, and I think I've mentioned some of the reasons why, but we can even influence more companies, Israeli companies, to come to Arizona, which will increase the employment in Arizona and increase the transforming of Arizona into a technological hub. We have trade. We mentioned the trade. The trade is quite high. We're talking about 280 million export from Arizona just 2 years ago, which is not a small number. It's a very significant number. And the fields of interest in trade are computer and electronic equipment, chemicals, transportation, machinery, agricultural devices, and special classification provisions. So there are a lot of things going on between Israel and Arizona, and we can do more. So with your help, with the governor's help, with friends like Tony and others, we can certainly move this forward. And the coronavirus, as I mentioned before, gives us some opportunities, especially in the artificial intelligence and innovation fields.
Thank you for that. I'd like to visit some of the points that you mentioned, where there's going to be the workforce over here. We have outstanding academic institutions. Recently, there was an article in the Phoenix Business Journal about Zoom expanding their operations here. So we all know how well they've done. I mean, you could see a customer of theirs, but they pointed out the talent on the engineering side, in the engineering school at ASU. We look at Tucson with the University of Arizona there. I would say in several sectors, but on the water conservation side and the water technology side, working with the RFI Institute, we both live in arid landscapes and a lot of similarities that we can learn from each other. I would mention as well Embry-Riddle University up in Prescott, where it was an initial joint venture with Eviation, the electric airplane company that landed there just over a couple of years ago. So in terms of talent and when Israeli companies are looking for expansion, that's one offering. I could go on the pitch of Arizona, but I would be here for a little while. But I would say you mentioned trade delegations, which I believe is an integral part. I often give an analogy that I can tell you how great cheesecake is, but really until you taste it, you're not going to appreciate it. And I say that on both sides, both on the Israeli side and on the Arizona side. Arizona entities that are looking to engage with Israel, they may have read the book Startup Nation, they may have read many articles, and sometimes it's the political landscape that paints the picture, which is part of the reality, but the innovation side, when you're in Tel Aviv and you're in Herzliya and you go to Jerusalem and you're meeting with entrepreneurs, you're meeting with in R&D centers, accelerators, incubators, academic institutions. That is a very different experience than reading about it. And the same as I say to Israelis, they may look at the industry and stats. You mentioned aerospace and defense. There's over 1,400 companies within the supply chain in Arizona. And that's a mind-boggling number. I believe it's the second largest in the United States. But when Israeli companies come here, whether it's going to be on a customized trip that they're coming for business engagement, if they're coming on a delegation, feeling, touching, experiencing, meeting is really optimal. And we've seen people with, they may have been intrigued, they become exuberant, and it's something that I always encourage. Really, all entities, if they are serious about innovation, if they're serious about growing and moving to those next stages, is to go and visit each respective destination. And we look forward to all pending travel to leading another delegation, either the end of this year or sometime next year. And obviously, we highlight in our annual luncheons the Israeli companies that are here and some of the innovations that are going on. I think we can move to a couple of questions and answers that we have on the forum. And if the audience is looking,
if I may just respond briefly to what you said, I'll just mention two very short things. One, we can also think about virtual delegations. It's something we can try and do. We can do like a virtual visit to Israel, meeting economic counterparts in economic fields. And secondly, I agree fully with you that there's nothing like a visit to Israel. The dynamism and the energy that is coming out of Israel is really quite special. So you have to experience it. And we say that I'll be out of a job because the more people go to Israel, they become ambassadors for Israel. So, but I'm encouraging it.
On that note, as we talk now, there are two virtual delegations that are going on. Number one is we have the Arizona Commerce Authority is hosting the Unmet Conference with, I think, well over 100 companies from around the world that are pitching to investors. There are 8 Israeli companies that are participating. That was a joint collaboration with our director in Israel, Nitzan Nerov, and the director of the Arizona Commerce Authority, the trade office, David Yari, of where they brought companies for this opportunity. So virtually we have 8 Israeli companies participating in Arizona. It was supposed to be a in-person. And then also EcoMotion. That's another initiative that the trade office worked with EcoMotion that's going on. And one that there is that collaboration between Arizona and Israel on the virtual front as well. So I'm glad that you mentioned that, as today we have 2 of those going on. Now, in terms of the, we're getting a question here about the consul's role and territory that it oversees. What resources, how is the consul a resource for specifically business as it relates to Arizona corporations?
Sure, thank you for the question. First of all, we are sitting in Los Angeles, but we are responsible for 6 states in the region. Not everybody knows this, but consulates, Israeli consulates, we have 8 in the United States, besides the embassy, which is in Washington. And the 8 consulates spread all over the United States are responsible for different geographic areas. So we are responsible for the entire what we call southwestern region of the United States, running from South California to Mexico and a bit eastward. So we cover states like Southern California, Nevada, Wyoming, Arizona, Utah, Hawaii, that area. And I'd just like to say about our mission, of course, is very diverse. We work with, our main mission is strengthening the relations between the United States and Israel, which means political connections and economic ties. So that is our top agenda, and we work on it in all states. I have the privilege of sitting here in Los Angeles, but being responsible for Arizona. And therefore, we have a close connection with Arizona, and we want to develop it as much as possible. Regarding the work of the consulate during this period of the coronavirus, our work has changed a lot. But unfortunately, I did not have time for myself, like many people did. And we were very busy in the shifting missions that we had due to the coronavirus. So at the beginning, we were dealing with procuring items. We were dealing with donations that were given from Israel to the United States or from the United States to Israel. We had, of course, the Teva Israeli medical company donated 6 million pills to the United States. So we were dealing with that as well here. We had people in California and other places who donated masks and money even to Israel. So we're dealing with that as well. We had Israelis who were stranded. We had Israelis, for instance, on a boat here we came to San Diego, and they didn't have visas to enter the United States, and they were stuck on a boat where there was people who were sick with the coronavirus on the boat, and there were no airlines anymore to take them back to Israel. So we have to deal with this situation of rescuing the stranded Israelis, and unfortunately they give us a lot of business because Israelis tend to trek to the most remote places, and then we have to go out there and save them. So that's part of our job as well. We also had transferring bodies. So just like we have to deal with the living, we have to deal with the dead. We had also a lot of people who wanted to visit Israel, even under the coronavirus situation, and then we had to deal with how to solve it, how they can visit, how they can't visit. Quite at the early beginning of the process, it was decreed that only Israeli citizens can return to Israel, and there'll be no visits of non-Israeli citizens right now. So we had a lot of special cases, and they needed a lot of dealing with. I also mentioned one more thing, that, of course, we digitalized all our activity. We moved over to the internet, and we also set up billboards expressing our solidarity with the people and with the first responders. So we're also trying to express in our way, in the way that we can, our solidarity with the people. So we've also dealt with assistance, and I myself went to assist in a central food packaging area, which is run by Israel, which is an Israeli NGO, which does a lot of assistance work, wonderful activity, a lot of social impact they have. So I went there to volunteer together with them, and we did some work there. So where our agenda is very diverse, and it has shifted because of the coronavirus, which keeps us busy.
Another question that we have here, you mentioned earlier on about Israel not having any natural resources, and hence the need for innovation. Energy in Arizona is obviously whether it's going to be on the solar side, there's a lot developing on the solar energy side. In addition to other areas, we have large utilities here, of whether it's collaborations and continued explorations, and where there are synergistic areas for those collaborations. Can you highlight, or can you mention any of the natural gases that have recently been found off the coast of Israel? Is that something that Israel is able to capitalize on? How does that affect, does it affect prices of energy around the world? Because obviously this is a very large reserve that has been found.
Yes. Well, that is very new for Israel to enter into what's called the energy suppliers. And for years, we were crying the fact that we did not have any natural resources. We were not blessed and graced with gas and oil like some of our neighbors. In fact, there's a joke, about Moses, that he not only stammered, but he also had other problems, because he was obviously a bad navigator, because for 40 years he led the people of Israel in the desert until he brought them to the promised land, which was one of the countries with the least natural resources. But the truth is that it was a very wise step, because bringing the people of Israel to the land of Israel without natural resources obligated the people of Israel to innovate. And that's what they did. And that was the revelation of ingenuity and innovation, what we call the startup nation, because they had no other choice. So that was the first 70 years of Israel. And only recently we have, for the first time, become a supplier of energy, as you mentioned, of gas. Fields were found out in the ocean, what's called Leviathan, and other mines, fields. And this is new for Israel. We hope it won't affect our ingenuity and innovation. So there's some who are a bit suspicious about it, and they say better off without it. But we have it. So we've already signed deals of supplying gas to outside players, including some of our neighbors like Egypt. And we're also talking about supplying to Europe. And we're talking about deals with Greece and Cyprus. Now, there's a wonderful relationship, what's called the trilateral relationship, which is the relationship between Israel, Greece, and Cyprus. And it's a relationship which has gone very strong over the past 2 years. And it covers just about every field, whether it's gas, natural resources, even tourism and other fields. You mentioned also solar energy. Of course, that's something which was developed from the beginning of the State of Israel. Because we did not have natural resources, we went into the field of sustainable energy, green energy, solar energy. There's a lot of sun in Israel. So just about every single residence in Israel has heaters on the roof, which are heated by solar energy. This is something very developed in Israel. We're also developing the entire comprehensive idea of manufacturing electricity and manufacturing electricity from solar. Unfortunately, it's still not the most economic. It's not the most affordable, but it's an investment in the future. So that is something which is still being developed by Israel, and we're moving over as much as possible to natural, solar energy and those types of energies.
Dr. Newman,
I hope I've answered your question.
Yes, thank you for that. Our time is coming close to an end, talking about energy. Our partners, the Bird Foundation, who I mentioned earlier, they have their calls for proposals out right now, looking for Arizona entities, looking for joint ventures with Israeli companies, and you can visit more. That's coming up at birdf.com. That's birdf.com, and the more innovation we see between the two states is definitely something that we look forward to assisting with. Dr. Newman, thank you so much for your time. It's really been a pleasure. We look forward to hosting you in person in Arizona, and to our audience who have all stayed on, the large majority have stayed on for the entire webinar. I think that's testament to you, Dr. Newman. We encourage you to reach out to us, how we can be a resource to you, how we can assist you. Whatever you think may be of benefit, I'm sure with additional research and insight, you'll see that there is a lot more that can and will be going on between Arizona and Israel. So thank you all for joining us today. And Dr. Newman, thank you so much, and be safe, be well.
We are in debt to you. Thank you, Leib, for your wonderful, courageous work in Arizona, strengthening the relationship between these two great entities, Arizona and Israel. There's a lot we can do. The future is in front of us, and I applaud your activity and your organization's activity on this behalf. Thank you very much for hosting me.
Thank you. Have a good day.